Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining in another episode of On a Bridge MD, where we bring you hope driven by science. And thank you so much for tuning in after a full month off. We needed a month of January to get back into what we wanted to bring to our auditors. And if you like this podcast, please share it. We are getting more and more coverage, and we're having more and more auditors. So it's such a pleasure to serve you. Today, I have a very incredible special guest. We are going to talk about dementia, Alzheimer, as well as just the process of aging. Dr. Dani Cabral is a double board certified neurologist and psychiatrist. This double board doesn't come that often, and so you really want to do that. It's more training, more time, and it's also a lot more knowledge and a lot more expertise. And so without further ado, Dr. Cabral, thank you so much for being on the show. It's such a pleasure to talk with you. How did you decide to do what you do, and maybe explain to the auditors what you are doing? We don't see people who are interested, physicians that are interested in, and how did you call yourself, Alzheimer specialist?
Yes.
How did you get into this?
I've always loved old people. Ever since I was young, I happened to be around lots of older people, not so many kids around me and my family and growing up. And I always just thought they seemed like they knew something that we didn't as young people. And I had some losses in my earlier life and went through a lot of grief. And so the combination of those things drew me to the whole world of dementia, which has lots of grief, right? Small and large losses over many years for multiple people, the patient, the care partner. And so I felt like it was such a challenge and so mysterious, and really not a lot of people want to help older adults. They're sort of, grew up going to medical school. It's like, that's the last specialty that gets any interest, geriatrics or older adults. So I've always been wanting to do things that are really challenging. And so I did both of the specialties, feeling like you really need a sense of both to give people what they need when they're aging and having these cognitive changes and losses going on.
I really love this. And so when you went into the medical field, you knew already that you wanted to take care of aging people.
I did. So I had a non-traditional path, as some of us do, to medical school, and I had 7 years between undergrad and med school. And during that time, I partly worked for a hospice dementia program. So that was in 2005. Before that, hospice was really focused more on a cancer model of how to help people dying of cancer. And those people generally could communicate their needs and be with their families in those final moments. But when it comes to people dying of dementia, they often can't communicate, via language. And so I was so moved by what this program was doing to help people in these really low tech ways, but making a huge impact with things like music therapy, pets, hand massage, these simple things, and that are sort of common sense, but we don't do them often. And how much it impacted the person with dementia to calm down. Often we think of people being agitated and they're getting all of these medications, antipsychotics and things, and sometimes being restrained, physically. And it's so traumatizing. But yet when we did these simple things, it helped the patient, it helped the family. It allowed for more conversations to happen and really made a big impact. So I had that experience going into medical school, and was just so fascinated by the brain and consciousness and all the things we don't know. There's so much.
And I think that's actually super interesting. I know that neurology and psychiatry used to be a common field, but you really chose to do both, right? Which one did you choose first?
I chose neurology first. And I think I liked that it was a little more sort of the hardware, like at that time, and still it's very much like localize the lesion, find where the problem is in the brain, and then you can often see it linked back to the body. So for example, when someone has a stroke, as You can often link it to the actual physical symptoms. And it was a lot of intellectualizing, which I liked. But then there was absolutely, I felt like a piece missing for what I wanted to offer, especially in the room with the patient, to create a therapeutic experience. And when it comes to dementia, that's such a huge piece, the psychological, spiritual, existential impact. So felt like I should do this very long training.
Yeah. And do you feel like the psychiatric training actually, so right, like from an outside perspective, and it's funny because I'm actually a doctor, like I should know, but, and I have some of my best friends are psychiatrists. Like one of my best friends in France is a psychiatrist, and she did a psychoanalysis, and she brings, this psychotherapy, psychoanalysis approach to our psychiatric approach. But from whatever I've learned in medical school, it sounded more like you diagnose and then you treat with medication, and that's the difference with a therapist that would treat with speech and just talking, right? Did you feel like that's something like that you learned a lot from your psychiatric training? I just, yeah.
Like you said, psychiatry and neurology used to be combined. They were seen as together, the brain and the mind, and even maybe the body was more considered as a whole part of the being. And in the past, those things were more intrinsically tied together with the psychotherapy part, which there's many types of psychotherapy, as you mentioned, and then the medication part. And that's really changed over time, where even in my residency, over a decade ago, it was more of a focus on medication management. And sadly, I think that's because of our healthcare system and how we get reimbursed. And there's more, and though there are many, many medications in psychiatry that are helpful, we know that both psychotherapy plus medication is beneficial, at least with depression, certainly. And so in terms of, I felt like when it came to dementia, when I would shadow psychiatrists or neurologists seeing people with dementia and their families, the neurologists were missing that piece, like I mentioned, of really creating space to connect, which is can be so therapeutic to ask the care partner, how are you doing? You can see them in distress in the room, but there was more of like, we don't have time for this. Like, I can't open this up. Like, I don't know I care, but I don't know what to do with it if I open it up. And I have to see, another patient in 5 minutes. So it's totally, understandable. And then with psychiatrists in dementia, at that time, I didn't see them thinking about the biologic basis of what was happening. Like, what's going on in this older adult's brain that's causing them to act this way or have these symptoms. Reading a brain MRI, it really changes a lot of how you approach a person. Say, if you think they have Lewy body disease, which is very complex and it's on the Parkinson's spectrum, it can be quite different in how you're going to treat and counsel patients. So it just seemed like I got to know all of these things, to do that.
I love that. And so then in coming to your, so first of all, thank you so much for doing what you do. As the population is aging, and we are, like the type of society that we live in are it's almost monoparental at this point, like in a lot of cases. And we don't have all of the support that we used to have as a family, when there's almost like the village caring for the elders. And I see that from my ancestry, like in Corsica, where my grandma used to take care of the elders and the small village she was coming from. So we don't have this anymore. So thank you for doing what you do. What's exciting currently in the realm of dementia in general? Like what excites you as a neurologist and a psychiatrist? I'm sure there is a lot of new things happening, right?
Yeah, I think my answer might be surprising. So, of course, you or some of the listeners might think I'm going to talk about these advances in Alzheimer's biomarker testing. Like, we can, there's pretty accurate blood tests now for Alzheimer's disease in people who are symptomatic. We have treatments approved. We have 2 disease-modifying treatments approved, which are anti-amyloid monoclonal antibody treatments. And I led those trials. I've seen people do well on these medications.
When do you give them? At the beginning?
Yeah. So they're for early symptomatic Alzheimer's, which includes mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. So those are the first symptomatic stages, as opposed to, you don't give them to people who are just worried that they have the disease yet, and maybe have positive Alzheimer's biomarkers. So they have to be symptomatic at this point, and they're IV drugs given every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on the medication. And they've been shown to slow the progression significantly of cognitive and functional decline during that stage of the disease. They're controversial for many reasons, and probably too much to talk about in this session, but maybe another time. So I've been excited to be a part of this progress because, there's been over 200 negative trials in Alzheimer's disease, like all the trials except for the cholinesterase inhibitors like Aricept, donepezil, memantine until 2013. So luckily that's starting to open people's minds. It gives a little hope where people are starting to actually look at dementia, Alzheimer's, whereas I think there's a collective fear and denial and dread of facing that possibility for ourselves, even though many of us will go on to develop dementia. Like a high number of us will, yet very few of us can put ourselves in that place mentally, which is kind of, I think, a defense mechanism that we have. So what I think is interesting is I see this with my patients. I realize many of them stopped doing things that I thought they were technically still capable of. Like they love to travel, this couple, yet they stopped in the early stages. And I know that it requires adaptations, but I really thought like they're physically capable, they're relatively, their mood's good. But all these different people were stopping their hobbies and things that brought them joy. And so their worlds got very small, right? And I think that speeds up the disease process, frankly, when people stop doing those things that are important to them and decrease their social interactions. And so now we have, the older adults, a lot of us, as we're getting older, going along with this narrative of like, okay, we need to enclose ourselves in these little retirement communities, right? And they're so fun, and it's like all these activities, yet we are removed. No one else, we don't, like younger people, and I'm like middle-aged now, but definitely younger people. We don't see a lot of older adults like you're like talking about Corsica and things like that. Like they're much more out in the world in other places yet. So we don't see them. And then we have younger adults with this epidemic of mental health issues, increased suicide rates higher than ever, just loneliness and dehumanization, really, right? So like I draw a connection between those things. And so I'm hoping that these new advances spur people to like the window to crack open, basically, to be like, okay, can we start to see a world where we can each benefit from connecting with each other? And it's not just young people volunteering to help older people to like get it on their, college resume.
This is fascinating to me because I had forgotten, but my dad was a retirement director, like for a very short period of time when we were in France. And I was super young. I think I was maybe like 5 or 6, or I was definitely in kindergarten or pre-K. And what he was doing is that he would invite the pre-K and kindergarten in that hospital. I mean, it was kind of an hospital, and there was like, he would project movies so that both the elder people and the young, very kids, would actually just be together. And to me, they were like my grandparents. Like I didn't know the difference between them and other grandparents in that age. You're not judgmental also, right? And I think it brought so much pleasure to that community, right? And it's really interesting that you're saying, I do think sometimes, my parents are in France, so they don't have grandparents, and their other grandparents are also abroad. So my kids don't have this connection with grandparents here. And so I was like, maybe there is a way to adopt grandparents. And I haven't found anything here, but I would love it because I think that there is something that elderly, more elder than me, can bring to my kids. They are 9, and so I love that you're sharing that, and I love that that's what you're seeing.
Thank you. Yeah, I've also in my work, it took me a while to realize when I'd have these visits with older adults, I'd sometimes leave the room and I was like, I feel really good right now. Like I was nourished by their presence. And sometimes it's just watching a couple who's been married for 50 years, like, and then nonverbal, like, energy between them. And it's a good model for me. I feel like I need good role models in all sorts of ways, especially with my life. I don't have a lot of older people in my life. A lot of them have passed away, or, I don't live near family. So, and then I think about, I don't have the biomarker or biologic substrate for like what that feeling is I'm experiencing. And maybe someday we will, but this is what I think, like something's happening in that room, and that like young people and older people, like both could get something out of it, and being around each other. And that, I love that, what your father, that's a beautiful example, and so easy, right? So low tech.
Yeah, so easy. And maybe that's what we need. And I think you're right. Like I do see it. I have seen this where patients are very lonely and they're young.
Yeah.
Not so much in Colorado. I'll say much less in Colorado than, for example, when I was in New York City. But it is very interesting because we have so many means to be connected, yet we are so lonely. And people who are older can really bring so much culture that we're not used to, right? Like they've lived a life that we haven't lived. So I really love that. Maybe we should create an association or organization to pair kids and their like adopted grandparents. Because when I looked at adopted grandparents or adopted grandparent, or it was, dementia, like it was really fully dementia. And you're like, well, that's not really what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Like more of a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's really interesting. And we talked a little bit about music therapy. I find that really interesting. We know that music helps the brain of kids and, young adults. And I think it just helps create, more connection and so on. What does it do in dementia?
So music is represented in multiple places in the brain. So it can be activated, so it can like wake up the brain in a way, even for someone who's in the most advanced stages of dementia. And those, where it's stored is close to that memory center, where especially we see that if we play music that we call the person's anthems, when we're like teens and early 20s, that really activates what I've lately started calling like one's life force. You feel that. And especially now, like as I'm getting older and I'm now like revisiting the music of my high school, or, like hair metal, for example, which I was like, I was never into that. And so suddenly I'm in, I don't know if you were, what I'm talking about when you were in France, but in any case, that's just like my own personal example. But yeah, so if we bring a song to someone who's like, maybe not, they're severe dementia, they're really not interacting or moving. And you see this with now very excellent research studies that are demonstrating that people will, like the elevator like comes up, and like they're connecting, like they're tapping their foot, they look happy, they're more relaxed, or they're physically, they get up and dancing, for people, like some people who can do that. And it's that's a huge change, right? Yeah. Like maybe somebody otherwise we wouldn't think like tapping their toe is like a big deal, but this is a huge deal because this person maybe hasn't moved like or talked in weeks. So we're still learning about it. And I've been saying this, and frankly, I can't believe our insurers don't pay for music therapy, for example, with dementia, because there's such good evidence now. Like it's clear, but it's easy to say, well, the studies were all done slightly differently, so we can't do a systematic review and show definitively like which approach works. But I think that's sort of criminal. And if we're going to instead use powerful medications to calm people down, like that's also like much more costly. Yeah. So yeah, I went off on a tangent.
No, I love it. No, and I love that tangent. And I could talk for hours about this because it's really such an important topic and so important, and it's preventive, right? Like you potentially, when you can treat, then you probably can prevent with this. But Dr. Cabral, if anyone wants to know more about you, know where to meet you, know where to send you their loved ones, or make sure that you talk with them, maybe with caretaker, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Brain Love, and we're at mybrainlove.com. That's one word. Come sign up for the email list. There's all sorts of exciting things happening.
I love it. Well, thank you so very much. We'll put this in the show notes also. Dr. Cabral, thank you so much for your time, for all of this energy that you're putting in something that's so needed. And yeah, really, really love what you do, and really just thank you for for me in the future, for my kids in the future, because we are all going to know at least one person that has dementia if it's not us, right? So thank you so much for doing this. And maybe if you have one tip before we leave for maybe prevention for anyone that's here and is like, okay, I don't want, how can I prevent it?
I think since we're in the month of, love, Valentine's Day, social connection, just smiling at people, showing love to people you care about, giving hugs and receiving that from them actually make an impact.
I love it. Well, that's a beautiful last word. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you very soon, I'm sure. Take care.